All right, back now with another episode of Live 5 Deep Dive. Today, I am sitting down with anchor Samantha German, who has just recently completed a story, a little bit about history, a little bit about the culture around here. First off, thanks for coming by because you've got an amazing story to tell.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me.
So, you recently did this kind of tour almost of Charleston, in particular downtown Charleston. And I think lots of people, when they do take a tour of Charleston, they hear this interesting fact about the bricks here.
Yes.
Tell us about the story. Tell us about the bricks.
Okay, absolutely. So I actually found out about fingerprints in bricks with two of the other stories that I did before this one. I was taking a tour with certified tour guide Ruth Miller, who's amazing. And I was on a story talking about the history of just the charm, with Charleston. And she was explaining about the bricks and she was going into deep detail. And I just kind of like kept that in the back of my pocket because I wasn't going to use that for the story that I was currently working on. Then when I went to the Avery Research Center talking about celebrating their 160th anniversary that they had, I noticed one of the guys, his name is Darren Lee Calhoun, who's amazing. He pointed out that there were gold fingerprints like along the bricks in the Avery Research Center. And I was like, huh. And I went back to what Ruth Miller was telling me about. And I was like, this is an incredible story. Fingerprints in bricks here in Charleston that we walk by every single day. So that's kind of why I wanted to do this story. And I never knew anything about it.
Yeah, I think people maybe don't recognize this, though if you look around, you might understand it. There's no hard stone in Charleston. So all of the buildings that had to be built here were made out of brick, which means they basically took clay, turned them into bricks, then turned them into buildings. But in order to get the bricks, someone's got to do all that labor.
Yes.
Before we jump into your story, can you just talk very briefly about how intense, labor intensive this brick creation is?
So intense. And again, I don't have we're about to watch our story. So Paul Garbarini was saying how it takes a year. It's like a year-long process. You have to wait. I believe they started digging the clay in autumn. So you would have to go down to the marshes at low tide, dig up the clay. You would have to wait for the clay to dry. Then you would have to flip the clay. And that's when the fingerprints would sometimes get stuck in the bricks, flipping the clay to the other side so the other side could dry.
Yeah, you've got a really good line in there that will lay out exactly how long it takes to do all of these things. So pay attention to that when we air the story. But one thing we should be pretty clear on that I don't think that we've mentioned just yet is that the people doing this labor were enslaved Africans that have been in servitude for hundreds of years.
Absolutely.
In the area. So
some men, some women, and some children.
Yeah.
And I think that really sticks out because this, again, was intense labor. And just to have children having to do this, being forced to do this.
Yeah. When people say that Charleston was built by enslaved labor, this is what they mean. Literally the bricks that were created to build the city, the bricks themselves were created by enslaved labor, enslaved hands. Yeah. So let's go ahead, jump into your story. If you're listening to the podcast, you're just going to enjoy the sounds. It'll all make sense. It's going to be great. Samantha and our photography team did a great job with this piece as well. So it should not be a problem. All right, let's watch.
Okay.
Approximately 350,000 bricks are made every day at Palmetto Brick Company in Wallace, South Carolina. It's one of the few manufacturing brick facilities in the entire state. This fully robotic plant in the year 2026 is a striking contrast to how bricks were made in Charleston more than a century ago.
Any brick building built prior to the 1860 is the result of the brick-making knowledge of our enslaved ancestors.
It's the labor of the enslaved on the plantations that created the wealth. But then what a lot of people don't realize is that these buildings that we have downtown were primarily constructed with slave labor. And on top of that, it's all slave-created materials.
All made by hand.
This is a very complicated pattern, by the way. So this is making diamonds. Can you see this? See the diamond pattern? That's not just slopping together. There's patterns in these bricks.
Complicated patterns.
At one time, this was a very, very impressive facade. Somebody is showing you they paid to have it done perfectly.
From a complicated process. Certified tour guide Ruth Miller says in the year of 1849, more than 6 million bricks were produced by people who were enslaved in Mount Pleasant, where the clay was located.
It took about 6 men and a child to make 8,000 to 9,000 bricks a day. So they'd start in the autumn and they'd go out into the river at low tide and they would dig clay out of the river's edge.
Leave them out in the sun to dry. Well, the other side has to dry also. So you have to take them out of the mold. And sometimes when you take them out of the mold, they're still a little pliable. And ever so often you can leave a fingerprint.
It's amazing, you can touch on history.
At the corner of Church and Chalmers, I was able to place my fingers where one of the once enslaved masons put theirs. It was extraordinary. Gratitude, and a powerful feeling of appreciation and pride barely describe the feeling.
A lot of the bricks, a lot of the buildings that are in these historic cities built prior to 1860, our embodied energy are in those bricks.
And from using wood-fired ovens or kilns, these bricks, laid like puzzles, have a very distinctive look.
It's a clay that has a high iron content to it. So when the clay is fired, the iron is going to oxidize. It turns black, and you'll see all the black speckles. That's one characteristic of our brick.
Joseph McGill, founder and director of the Slave Dwelling Project, spends nights and organizes overnight stays in former slave dwellings. He studies physical clues of human history, sometimes quietly peeking through.
When I go to these places to sleep in some of these buildings, they are quite surprised that I pay more attention to the bricks than I do to them, because I'm looking
for subtle messages left behind as evidence of the lives who existed and whose hands were forced to shape out of clay what we marvel at today as Charleston beauty and charm.
Sometimes they're shy. It's like they have to trust you before they'll show themselves.
Research specialist and tour guide Paul Garbarini says most people pass these bricks all the time and don't understand they're surrounded by something incredibly remarkable. He and artist Natalie Days came up with the idea of gold-leafing fingerprints on the bricks found around the Avery Research Center.
It's poignant. It moves me deeply. I don't know their names. I don't know how to learn their names, but I know that they left the mark. I was here.
These bricks have something to say. If it weren't for the genius knowledge and elaborate yet grueling work of these masterful brick makers once in bondage, there would be no charm, let alone Charleston. A bold declaration left modestly in unidentified fingerprints along these bricks. I was here and still am here. As proof, you can trace your fingers along the imprints of mine. In Charleston, Samantha German, Live 5 News.
All right, back now with Samantha German. Excellent story, really good stuff. I can tell you guys took a lot of time to figure out exactly, how you wanted to shoot it, who you wanted to interview, and of course, exactly the words that you were putting into this. Now, you actually got an email after the fact to ask you specifically about the words that you were putting into the story. Can you talk a little bit about what that email was and what your response was?
And again, I don't want to this is the exact email. I'm not going to call any names or anything because I actually really did appreciate this question. So I got an email after our story aired, and the guys said, what's the difference between a slave and an enslaved person? Just curious. And I really appreciated that because I really As journalists, words are everything. That's our job. And we try and be as intentional as we can. And so I responded by saying the word slave takes the humanity out of a person's identity. So when we say formerly enslaved person or formerly enslaved Mason, it makes you see them as the people who they were, as people, not property, as what they were once considered, but they weren't property. They were people. And I really wanted to be deliberate, especially with this story, and now always really of not saying slaves, but saying formerly enslaved people or, enslaved labor. Because the story just shows you these were people who made this city, built this country.
Yeah. And I think you hit it on there. You see this a lot with, especially the good tour companies around here, is that the trend is to adapt the language as we learn more about, the cultures that were here, and whether that is the African-American community or the Native American community. The language is always evolving. So maybe slave is what they would have said 10, 15, 20 years ago. And now the intentionality is to maintain the humanity of the people that were working. And so we tend to use the term enslaved person to show that it wasn't, they weren't a slave. They were a person that was into forced servitude, basically.
Absolutely. And I love that you said as we learn more, because I think that's really what it is, just seeing a different perspective,
Now, you're from Mount Pleasant.
Yes.
So I'm sure some of this stuff was around you as you lived in Mount Pleasant. But this is the fun thing about being a journalist, right? Is that you always learn more about the community that you're from or the community that you're living in. And I think you discovered that, a major attraction in Mount Pleasant, Boone Hall, is where a lot of these bricks were from, right?
And it's so amazing being back home. I've been away for like 15 years, but even growing up, I'm from Mount Pleasant. I never knew this about the bricks here in Charleston. And so, it's no surprise. I'm a Black woman, Black journalist, and being from Mount Pleasant, telling the story of bricks that came and were made from Mount Pleasant, from people who came before me. I might even say family, It's incredible. It's incredible. And this story was very, it almost felt personal to me. It was powerful.
Yeah, you had a moment in the story where I think you had like your hand up against the brick, and you could see
I'm getting chills now.
Your hand almost fits perfectly into
the fingerprints. And it just was, and I say too, I'm saying all these things and trying to describe how that feeling felt. There are no words that can describe it. It was powerful. There was a sense of appreciation, of pride. It just was an amazing sense of gratitude, I just felt like the people who came before me.
You talked earlier about the Avery Center and how they've got the gold flecks on some of these bricks. I didn't know that they did that. I had known about the fingerprints in the bricks. It's kind of one of my favorite things to tell people when they're walking around. Like, if you have family or friends that come down, I always tell them, like, as you're walking, you see some indentations in the bricks, especially in certain areas. That's a fingerprint. It's not just like wear and tear. But I just think that it's so interesting, and they can be hard to spot, which is why I like that the Avery Center decided that they were going to mark them specifically.
Absolutely. And then you see how complex it is. Like, these were patterns. Like, this was hard to do. I loved how Ruth Miller was like really showing and telling, and she was saying, you can see the diamonds, like the complicated patterns. That was really intense work.
Yeah, someone had mastered their craft. I didn't know. I knew about the fingerprints, but I didn't know about the patterns. And I thought that was really interesting.
And then people wanting to show off how much they paid for these patterns. They wanted to keep that brick, exposed brick today. They want to see just how much went into it.
Which is very interesting, because I believe at the time when these buildings were being built, they were basically plastered over. And so they would all be brick, and then they'd plaster them over so they looked like big white sheets of stone.
Yes.
Because again, as we mentioned, there's no stone here, so it's all brick. but they'd plaster it so that it looked like a big wealthy British town and
Absolutely.
not a brick town. So it's interesting how that was the style then. Now lots of people want to expose the brick and show it off, and because it's got all that culture underneath. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
One more thing here, because on Deep Dive, oftentimes we deal with murder and death and the court system and cops and legal things, all sorts of fun stuff. But we have a number of, all of our anchors they do stories. Some of them are doing investigative stuff. But a number of you guys do these cultural stories, these history stories, in particular the highlighting Black voices, which has been a big push of ours in the last couple of years, is to highlight sort of the voices that we haven't heard from in a different context than what we've heard from in the past. Can you just talk a little bit about, why you feel it's important to show off some of these stories that have maybe just been in sort of a micro environment and never been elevated to, sort of a newscast or a documentary or whatever? Because you're working on stuff all the time on this.
Yeah. Well, I can just use this story here with just the brick making process as a perfect example for that. Like I said before, you never want to make the story about you. That's not what we do as journalists.
Right.
But there's a fine line when you're from an area and you're talking about the people who came before you. I think when I learned about the fingerprints in the bricks and, what it took to just build this city, build this country, I wanted to make sure that I kind of paid homage. I wanted to honor the people who came before us. And again, what we were talking about, have a different perspective. One of the people that I interviewed, everyone was truly amazing. Ruth Miller, certified tour guide, Joseph McGill, founder and director of the Slave Dwelling Project, Paul Garbarini, another research specialist. They just know their craft. And Paul Garbarini said, and I'm losing my words here, this beautiful soundbite that we ended the story with of, I was here. It's just painting that perspective of, we walk by this city that has been named the best city in the South for 10 years in a row, and we just forget to appreciate who helped build it.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it just was acknowledgement and wanting to acknowledge that and, not forget.
I don't know so much that when I watched your story that I thought the story was about you by any means. Like, I didn't think that you put yourself into it. But at the same time, I think that you sort of represented people that live here. And you can kind of vicariously live through you experiencing sort of this unraveling of this unique feature of Charleston, which are these fingerprints in the clay.
Yeah.
So yes, it's not about you, but at the same time, you're very representative of somebody who lives here and is embroiled in the culture, So I thought that was really nice to see, honestly. Sort of,
Thank you.
You could tell that you were connecting
with
the history here. So that was nice.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, I think I don't know that I have any more questions for you. I do know that you guys are always working on new and interesting projects. In fact, I think we're airing one tonight as well.
Yes.
Which will be on the website as well. So if you search for Samantha German on the website, it'll come up with this story.
All these plugs.
Also come up with her latest stuff, which is equally as good. So thank you so much for bringing your insight. This has been great.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Hopefully you'll have me again.
Well, I definitely will, I'm sure.
Okay.
All right. And make sure that you stay subscribed to Live 5 Deep Dive anywhere you get your podcasts. Of course, you can watch this episode and all past and future episodes on the Live 5 streaming service on apps like Roku, Fire TV, Apple TV, all of the TVs.
All of the
you
things.
can find us there. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.